Imagine signing the paperwork for a brand new car. You take the keys, you drive it home.
Right, the best part.
Yeah, exactly. You show it off to your neighbors, maybe post a picture behind the wheel on social media. You might even put a new car seat in the back. But then, like, a week later, your phone rings.
Oh, man. The dreaded phone call.
Exactly. It's the dealership telling you that, well, you don't actually own the car. The bank rejected the financing. And if you want to keep it, you need to come back immediately and sign a completely new contract with a massive interest rate hike.
It's called a yo-yo scam or spot delivery.
Hmm.
And it relies entirely on that psychological pressure of, not wanting to return a car you've already mentally claimed as your own. You just feel trapped.
And the crazy thing is, it happens every single day to thousands of buyers. So today, we're doing a deep dive into the mechanics of the modern auto financing industry. We want to understand exactly how buyers fall into these traps.
Yeah, and we have some really fascinating source material for this.
We do. We are working off a stack of internal operations manuals and strategic guides from online.cars, which is a platform powered by McCluskey Chevrolet out of Cincinnati, Ohio.
These documents offer this really clear window into the back-end algorithms, the wholesale strategy of auto lending. We're looking at the exact playbook for how dealerships navigate that massive gap between the estimated payment you see on a website and the final loan reality dictated by the bank.
Right, so the mission for this deep dive is to demystify that specific gap. Why does the shiny estimated payment online almost never match the final paperwork?
Which is such a common frustration.
Totally. And more importantly, how can understanding the mechanics of soft pulls, hard pulls, and full bank underwriting serve as your ultimate defense against predatory business models? So let's just start at the very beginning of the modern digital car hunt. You're online, you click a button that says, pre-qualify instantly. What is actually happening in the system right then?
So the system is running what's called a soft pull on your credit profile. The documents we're looking at detail a specific estimation tool used behind the scenes for this, specifically the Vericool tool or FlexPath DXP, and it essentially just pings the credit bureaus to grab a really high-level snapshot of your financial health.
Okay, so just a snapshot.
Right. And the critical mechanism here is that a soft pull completely bypasses the formal inquiry process. Because you aren't officially applying for new debt yet, you're really just checking your own status. The credit bureaus don't penalize you at all.
Wow, okay, so you get an estimated monthly payment and a rate range, and your credit score doesn't drop a single point, no matter how many times you run it on different dealership websites.
Exactly. That lack of penalty is the main appeal.
Hmm.
But, and this is a massive caveat that buyers often misunderstand, a soft pull is purely an algorithmic guess.
A guess? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it is not a rate check, it is not a pre-qualified offer, and is absolutely not a locked-in interest rate. The lender hasn't actually agreed to give you a dime yet.
I always thought of it like checking the Zestimate on a house you want to buy on Zillow.
Oh, that's a good comparison.
Right, because the algorithm looks at public data, it sees the square footage, looks at neighboring sales, and just spits out a number. It gives you a ballpark figure. But you would never, ever secure a mortgage based on a Zestimate.
No, of course not. The bank requires an actual human appraiser to go inside, check the foundation, look at the plumbing, and basically verify the real value before they write that check.
So the soft pull is basically the Zestimate.
Exactly. It looks at your 3-digit bureau score and maybe your total credit limits and just sort of assumes everything else about your financial life is standard. But when you move from browsing to actually buying, the bank requires the equivalent of that physical home inspection.
Okay, and that transition, that's what triggers the hard pull, right?
Right, exactly.
This is the moment the actual lender steps in to do the full underwriting. But let me play devil's advocate here. If the soft pull already confirmed my credit score is, say, a 720, why does the bank then demand my pay stubs, my proof of residence, and a list of references? I mean, shouldn't a 720 just be enough to lock in the rate?
You'd think so, but a 3-digit score is incredibly stripped down. It completely lacks context. And the full underwriting process is designed to uncover the exact context that the soft pull algorithm just ignored.
What kind of context?
Well, the first big metric is the depth of your payment history. Let's take that 720 credit score. If it was generated by one single $500 limit credit card that you've paid off every month for 2 years.
Which looks great on the surface.
It looks great. But to an auto lender, that file is terrifyingly thin. You have zero history of managing a $30,000 installment loan.
Ah, okay. So a 720 score for a college student with one credit card is treated entirely differently by the bank's algorithm than a 720 score for someone who has, successfully paid off 3 previous car loans.
Oh, vastly different. The bank assigns a much, much higher risk profile to the thin file. And then they also look at your debt-to-income ratio, or DTI.
Because the soft pull doesn't verify income.
Right. You just type a number into a web form, the algorithm just believes you. But during full underwriting, the bank analyzes your actual pay stubs. They cross-reference your monthly take-home pay against your rent, your credit card minimums, maybe student loans.
Basically looking for how stretched you are.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Because if your mandatory debt payments consume, say, 55% of your income, the bank knows that a single unexpected medical bill means they just aren't getting their car payment that month.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, the sources from online.cars also spent a lot of time breaking down the math of the loan-to-value ratio, or LTV. And this seems to be like the biggest hidden lever that completely changes the final interest rate. Let's walk through the mechanics of how LTV actually alters a loan.
Sure. So loan-to-value measures the size of the loan you were requesting against the actual liquid value of the asset securing it, which in this case is the car. And banks view cars as depreciating collateral. If you default, they have to repossess that car, send it to a wholesale auction, and try to recoup the remaining loan balance.
Let's put some real numbers to that. Say I'm buying a $20,000 vehicle. If I put $0 down, my LTV starts at 100%.
Correct.
But then I have to roll in state sales tax, title fees, and maybe a dealership registration fee. Suddenly, my loan is $22,000 on a car the bank values at $20,000.
Which puts your LTV at 110%. The bank is immediately in a negative equity position on day one.
Ouch.
Yeah. So you stop paying in month 2 and they have to auction the car for $17,000. They just lost $5,000. To offset that elevated risk, their pricing model automatically kicks your application to a higher interest rate tier.
Wow.
And the thing is, that initial soft pull estimate you saw online, it almost certainly assumed a standard 80 to 90% LTV scenario, usually factoring in a healthy down payment.
Okay, the gap between the soft pull estimate and the hard pull reality is really starting to make mechanical sense now. The estimate just assumes, best case, average variables. The actual underwriter adjusts the rate based on your specific DTI, your specific file depth, and the specific LTV of the exact car you picked.
Exactly.
And this gap, I imagine, disproportionately impacts buyers with challenged credit.
Oh, absolutely. The subprime lending market is where this disparity becomes just glaring. The internal documents are very clear on this. For challenged credit buyers, the approved rate and terms from the full underwriting process almost always come back higher than the initial Vericool estimate.
Man, the psychological whiplash there must be intense, especially when you factor in the marketing environment out there. I mean, dealership websites are plastered with banners screaming, rates as low as 4.9%.
Yeah, and the phrase "as low as" is doing a tremendous amount of heavy lifting in those ads.
We got you.
Those promotional rates are heavily subsidized by the manufacturer and are reserved exclusively for super prime buyers. We're talking the absolute top tier of credit profiles, with deep histories and usually massive down payments.
But if you have, say, a 580 credit score, you still see that 4.9% banner. It completely anchors your expectation.
Right.
Then use a soft pull tool that spits out a somewhat optimistic estimate, say a $350 monthly payment. But by the time the bank does the deep dive into your file and prices in the real risk, the approval comes back at 16%, pushing the payment to $480.
And the emotional response from the buyer in that exact moment is usually shame, followed almost immediately by anger.
Yeah.
Millions of Americans fall into the subprime category, and it's often due to a single life event, like a medical emergency or a job loss.
Right, it carries this heavy societal stigma.
It does. So when the finance manager reveals that higher rate, buyers just feel embarrassed, and they naturally assume they're being scammed.
Well, yeah. I mean, from a purely financial perspective, taking on a 16% interest rate sounds terrible on its face. But the online.cars strategy documents frame the scenario totally differently. They actually approach subprime auto loans as a mechanical tool for credit rehabilitation. Let's analyze the math behind that strategy, because that's interesting.
Yeah, it's a smart way to look at it. The FICO scoring algorithm heavily weights your mix of credit and your payment history. So if your credit score is low because of maxed out revolving credit like credit cards, adding a fixed installment loan to your file fundamentally changes the algorithmic risk assessment.
Because an auto loan is a structured, secured debt.
Right.
So the mechanism of the rebuild relies on time and consistency.
Yeah.
If you make 12 consecutive on-time payments on that high-interest auto loan, the algorithm essentially interprets that as stabilized financial behavior.
Precisely. The heavy weighting of those 12 positive data points pulls the overall score up. So the strategy isn't to actually pay a 16% interest rate for the entire 72-month term of the loan.
Okay, what is the strategy then?
The strategy is to use the loan to mathematically force your FICO score into a higher tier over, say, 12 to 18 months. And then you immediately refinance the vehicle at a conventional, much lower rate.
Wow. Okay. But a dealership can only have that kind of strategic mathematical conversation about a credit rebuild if they are entirely upfront about the reality of the higher rate before the buyer gets emotionally attached to the car.
Exactly.
And this brings us to the operational divide in the industry, because how a dealership handles that transition from the soft pull estimate to the hard pull reality, it reveals their entire business model.
It really does. Traditional dealerships have realized that the emotional shame of a lower-than-expected credit approval can actually be weaponized. They exploit that gap between the estimate and reality to extract profit, which leads directly to the deceptive practices you mentioned at the start of our discussion.
Right, the nightmare scenario. Let's break down the mechanics of those traps, starting with the yo-yo financing scam. My initial thought when reading about this was, like, why would a dealership ever let you drive away in a $30,000 asset if the bank hasn't actually cut the check yet? I mean, that seems like a massive financial liability for the dealer.
It is a calculated risk, but it's designed to maximize leverage. So the dealer runs the soft pull, they see a marginal credit profile, but they tell the buyer, hey, great news, you're approved. And they let the buyer take the car on a spot delivery.
Knowing full well the bank hasn't finalized it.
Right. And the psychological priming begins the exact moment you pull into your driveway. You show the car to your family. You internalize ownership.
You've completely mentally integrated the car into your life. Returning it would require admitting to your friends and family that your credit wasn't good enough.
And the dealer knows this. When they call you a week later claiming, oh, the financing fell through, they aren't actually surprised. They often knew the original terms wouldn't pass full underwriting.
That is wild.
Yeah. But now, you are sitting in their office, terrified of the public embarrassment of losing the car. You are highly motivated to sign whatever new predatory contract they slide across the desk, regardless of how inflated the interest rate is.
That is basically psychological warfare. Now, the documents also highlight another tactic called payment packing. How does the math on that one work?
So payment packing relies on obfuscating the actual interest rate and the total cost of the car. They focus the buyer entirely on a monthly budget number. Let's say you tell the dealer, look, I can afford $400 a month.
Okay.
They will take the actual bank approval, which, say, might only require a $320 monthly payment, and they will stretch the term of the loan from 60 months to 84 months.
Wait, so they artificially lowered the base payment by extending the timeline, and then they use that extra $80 of monthly buffer to pack the contract with high-margin add-ons.
You got it. They just slide in a $2,000 extended warranty, maybe a $900 paint protection package, and a gap insurance policy, which brings the final payment right up to your $400 limit.
Man, so you walk away thinking you got a great deal because you hit your exact budget.
Exactly, but mathematically, you just finance thousands of dollars in junk fees at a high interest rate.
That is rough. But the internal documents from online.cars present a completely contrasting business model. They actually advocate for disclosing the gap between the estimate and the final approval up front. From an analytical perspective, this is a super interesting corporate strategy. I mean, they are essentially betting that intentionally breaking bad news early and maybe losing some angry customers at the top of the sales funnel is somehow more profitable than dealing with canceled contracts later.
Well, it's a strategy based on the economics of efficiency. Think about it, unwinding a yo-yo deal or managing furious buyers who realize they've been packed with fees. It requires immense labor hours from the finance department.
Plus, it generates terrible reviews and you lose referrals.
Exactly. So by deploying upfront transparency, literally telling a buyer with a 580 score, look, your soft pull shows $350, but based on our data, underwriting will likely require $450, and here is the exact mathematical reason why, they filter out unrealistic buyers immediately.
And the ones who stay are informed, they aren't manipulated, they actually understand the mechanics of the transaction. But, that still leaves a massive hurdle for the buyer. If the soft pull is just a rough estimate, and the hard pull is literally the only way to get the real numbers, how does a consumer shop around without absolutely destroying their credit score with multiple hard inquiries?
That's the secret. The auto lending industry actually built a specific structural protection into the credit algorithm for this exact scenario. The FICO scoring models recognize that a consumer needs to compare rates across multiple lenders to find a fair deal.
Wait, really? I always operated under the assumption that every single hard pull shaved points off your score instantly. Is there a loophole?
It's not a loophole. It is a designed feature. The FICO algorithm uses what's called a deduplication window. It typically ranges from 14 to 45 days, depending on the specific version of the scoring model the lender is using.
Okay, and what happens in that window?
Within that time frame, the algorithm groups all hard inquiries that are specifically coded for auto loans together.
So if I apply to my local credit union and then a major national bank and the dealership's finance department all over, say, a 2-week period, the algorithm doesn't penalize me 3 times?
Nope. Mathematically, for the purpose of calculating your score, all of those auto-specific inquiries are treated as a single event.
That is incredible.
Yeah, it might temporarily drop your score by a few points, but it absolutely won't trigger that cascade of penalties associated with, seeking multiple new credit cards all at once.
That completely changes the strategic playbook for the buyer. It means the soft pull is basically your protective shield during the browsing phase. You use it to figure out your general LTV constraints and narrow down your price bracket without triggering any inquiries. And then, once you know exactly what you want, you use that 14 to 45-day window as your green light to officially apply and force lenders to compete for your business.
Exactly. And the modern online model expands the strategy even further by removing geographical limitations. Traditional shopping limits you to the inventory physically sitting on a local lot. But the McCluskey Chevrolet documents detail the mechanics of their proprietary search platform.
Right. Rather than just showing a grid of cars, they describe it as a database constraint solver. Let's look at how that actually works for the buyer because it sounds pretty advanced.
It is. It takes the variables we just discussed. So your soft pull budget constraints, the LTV requirements of the lenders, and the specific down payment you have. And it filters those parameters against a national database of over 58,000 vehicles.
Wow.
Yeah, so instead of wandering a lot hoping to find a car that fits your math, the algorithm only presents vehicles that mathematically align with your estimated approval.
That efficiency is great. But, it introduces a massive new variable. Buying a car sight unseen. If I use the system, authorize the hard pull, sign the paperwork, and the dealer ships a car to me from 3 states away, how do I know I'm not stuck with a lemon?
Well, this is where the logistics of the transaction have to include contractual safety nets. If you are bypassing the traditional test drive, the business model itself has to absorb the risk of the unknown.
Right. And the documents outline 3 specific mechanisms that make this remote process viable. The first one is home delivery, which structurally eliminates the pressure cooker environment of the dealership's finance and insurance office. You aren't sitting in a cubicle for 4 hours dealing with manager theater.
Oh, manager theater. I love that term.
Yeah. It's that tactic where the salesperson constantly leaves to negotiate with some mysterious manager in the back room just to wear down your stamina.
Exactly. Yeah. With home delivery, you review the finalized paperwork on your own time, in your own home, without someone breathing down your neck. The second mechanism is a contractual return policy. The online.cars model specifies a 3-day, 300-mile, no-fault return window.
No fault is the operative phrase there. What are the actual logistics if you decide you just hate the car?
It's simple. You don't have to prove mechanical failure. You don't have to demonstrate that the dealer lied about the condition. If you drive it to work and realize, the sightlines are terrible or the seats hurt your back, you trigger the return clause.
And they just take it back?
Yeah. The logistics dictate that the platform must physically retrieve the vehicle and unwind the financing contract without financial penalty to the buyer, provided it's within that 300-mile limit, of course.
That is huge. It turns a 15-minute test drive with a salesperson talking over the radio into a full 3-day real-world audit. But the third safety net mentioned in the operations guide is, at least from a financial perspective, the most critical element for the subprime buyer. They issue a lifetime powertrain warranty on the vehicles.
Yes. And to understand why that matters, we really have to look at the financial math of a subprime default. For a buyer who's using a high-interest auto loan to rebuild their credit, their budget margins are usually razor thin.
Right. They have calculated exactly how much they can afford for the monthly payment and insurance.
Exactly. But they haven't budgeted for a catastrophic failure. Say they buy a used car, as is from a traditional lot. 4 months into the loan, the transmission blows.
Oof. And the mechanic quotes a $4,000 repair bill. The buyer obviously doesn't have $4,000 in liquidity, and because the car is immobile, they can't get to work. If they can't get to work, they lose their income.
And now they are faced with a terrible decision. Pay rent or make the $450 car payment on a vehicle that literally doesn't run.
They stop making the car payment. The bank repossesses the broken car, auctions it for pennies on the dollar, and the buyer is still legally responsible for the deficiency balance, the difference between what the car sold for and the total loan amount.
Right. And that default just destroys their FICO score, completely derailing the credit rebuild they initiated. The inclusion of a lifetime powertrain warranty, which covers the engine, transmission, and drivetrain for unlimited miles and years as long as the original buyer owns it, is essentially a financial hedge against that specific debt spiral.
It just stops the cascade at step one. The transmission blows, the warranty covers the $4,000 repair, the buyer gets to work, the loan payment is made, and the credit file continues to improve.
The entire system, the upfront transparency about the hard pull reality, the national database filtering, the no-fault return logistics, and that mechanical warranty, it has to operate in tandem. If any one of those pillars is missing, the remote buying model collapses right back into the adversarial, high-risk environment of the traditional lot.
You know, when we pull all of these threads together, the core takeaway from these operations manuals is really clear. The digital estimate generated by a soft pull is nothing more than a starting line.
A forecast, basically.
Exactly. Understanding the mechanics of what happens next, how underwriters evaluate the depth of your file, how loan-to-value ratios dictate those lender tiers, and how the psychology of the final approval is managed. It gives you the analytical power to evaluate the dealership itself.
Yes. If a dealer promises you the moon based on an algorithmic guess and then tries to rush you into a car before the bank cuts the check, you know you are walking into a trap. But if a dealer explains the mathematical realities of the hard pull up front, they're prioritizing a finalized, stable contract over a quick emotional close.
It's such a fascinating look at how data transparency can actually alter consumer behavior. Which leaves us with a final thought to ponder. We've seen how this model of digitized, upfront honesty, literally telling a customer an estimate is probably wrong just to build long-term trust, is attempting to disrupt the notoriously opaque auto industry.
It's a big shift.
It really is. Imagine applying this exact same framework of radical transparency to other anxiety-inducing transactions. Like, what would the economic impact be if the medical billing industry or the real estate market were forced to operate with this level of upfront mechanical honesty?
Oh, wow. It would completely rewrite the rules in consumer finance.
It really would. So the next time you are browsing online and a bright green button offers you an instant estimated payment, enjoy the convenience of this estimate. But keep your financial defenses up and make sure you know exactly what the underwriters are looking for before you authorize the hard pull.